of the mystical comes from beauty as much as feeling. And I really heard that in these memories that were shared. All right. Well, thank you all. And it is with great, great pleasure I present one of our triumvirate. And John, as long as we've been connecting this way, has been preparing this book. And I can only, as was said earlier, he's put everything in it. And I'll let John take it from there.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited and grateful to be here, and I'm so thankful that you are here with me and that I have a chance to share this with you, because it just means so much to me. This work has really been the culmination of my life. I mean, all the things I've written before, I realize we're building up to this. They've all been about the mystical journey of the second half of life. And then when the climate crisis struck, it just, I mean, I could not put them all together and bring them into the climate crisis. So, and looking back, I believe that this is the material. This material is the reason I'm here. The reason I took this incarnation, in addition to my family, but because I've been a mystic since I was like 5 years old or 4. I've just always been that way. So for me, I finally in this latter stage of my life got to say all that I wanted to say.
Can I interrupt, please, John?
What?
I can't hear you very well. Can you increase your volume a little bit? I've got mine up all the way.
Okay, I guess I can. Does anybody else? Is that better?
Yes.
Wow, that's loud. Can anybody not hear me? Okay, got it. This talk will be about 25 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to all of us to see what parts you want to respond to, where we want to go with it, and just open it up like a blossom. And this talk is dedicated to John Parenti, who was a teacher at the University of Creation Spirituality. Many of you may know him, may have known him. A lovely, lovely man. He died shortly after I finished my education there. And this is kind of one of the ways he used to start his workshops and his classes. So I'm borrowing some of this from him as a way to honor who he is and what he gave us. Listen to the sound of this Buddhist singing bowl. Notice what happens when you listen intently. Listen even more deeply. Notice what happens. What happens is that we stop thinking. We stop thinking, our senses sharpen, and we become radically present to the here and now. This shift in consciousness takes us into the mystical dimension if we pay attention. And what does this sound mean? It means only one thing. It means wake up. Wake up. That's the message of all the great spiritual teachers from across time and tradition and geography. And we have come here today in this moment, in this catastrophic time in history, really, to wake up. We must wake up, and we must wake up the world. Our survival clearly depends on that now. And this awakening of consciousness has profound implications for the climate crisis, which I'll explain in a moment. But let me begin with some background first. I'm a clinical psychologist with this second doctorate from UCS in ministry and an ordained interfaith minister and a writer, but mostly, as I said, I'm a mystic. I've been a mystic all my life. I remember running around in New Jersey in my bare feet after summer rain and just feeling the water in between my toes. And I just knew I was complete and didn't want to have to be put on the clothes of identity, time, and story and have to be somebody, because I was so happy with just the way it was. So I've been writing and lecturing about conscious aging for the last decade, about as a mystical experience. But more recently, as I said, I've come to realize that the mystical awareness of creation is critical to our surviving the climate crisis. So I wrote this book, Mystical Activism, Transforming a World in Crisis. And with a foreword by Matt Fox. And I wanted to apply the principles of mystical consciousness to climate activism. And I'll explain how that works in a minute, but really here's the most important thing to me right now and right here. With three, that is so strange. Okay, good. So with 3 adult children and 7 grandchildren, this topic is not abstract to me.
We need everyone to mute themselves, please.
You mute everybody at once, Gail?
No, I can't.
Oh, okay.
I can't, because when I turn on the big screen, it makes that sound. So everybody's going to have to be in charge of their own sound.
Okay, so everybody can go down to the bottom of either the left or the right side and mute your mic. So anyway, can you hear me? So
Yeah.
with my 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren, I am scared for their future, as I'm sure you are scared for the future of your loved ones. And I'm scared for the human family and for life here on Earth. Why? Because of climate change. It's real, it's here, it's bigger than we thought, and it's coming at us like a freight train. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this talk talking about climate effects, because you already know all of them. But I have a more extensive review of the climate science literature on my website if you want to go to it, johnrobinson.org. But I just want to start with one short, brief, nutshell description of the crisis so that we're all on the same page. The Earth, as you know, is getting hotter every year. Heat trapping CO2 is higher than it's been for 3 million years. In the last 5 years have been the hottest on record. You know, it's the greenhouse. Why is this important? Well, rising heat radically transforms the weather all over Earth, okay, creating dangerous heat spells, ferocious hurricanes, tornadoes, and forest fires, monsoon rains, expanding deserts, dying oceans, coastal flooding, inland droughts, an escalating tide of climate refugees, and a massive species extinction. It is frightening when you add it all up. It truly is almost a biblical apocalypse. Climate scientists say we are potentially facing the collapse of biological and social systems, literally threatening civilization as we know it. And then a consortium of 11,000 scientists from 153 nations just made this declaration last November. They said, and it's horrifying, they said, we declare clearly and unequivocally that planet Earth is facing a climate emergency. The climate crisis has arrived and is accelerating faster than most scientists expected, and it is more severe than anticipated, threatening natural ecosystems and the fate of humanity, And the lead negotiator in the Paris Climate Agreement added just last month, she said, what's at stake over the next decade is nothing less than the future of the planet and humanity on the planet. That's no exaggeration. That is not hyperbole. That is actually scientific fact. So this is where we stand. It just about brings you to tears. I went through a period last year where I just woke up every morning between, I don't know, about 2 and 5 in dread, in this horrible, gripping, strangling dread at what I could see was coming. And it just, I almost could not bear it until I kept working it and working it and working it until I found a way to present it in this kind of lecture. So it's here and it's real and it's bigger than we thought and it's happening now where we must wake up. But what are we going to do? I mean, and why am I talking about mysticism? I know you are all part of the choir, so I appreciate that. But a lot of people would say, what are you, crazy? I mean, what are you talking about? It seems so irrelevant at first glance. So I just want to unpack this idea because I think if we can explain it to other people, then we can begin to bring them on board with it. So what is mysticism? Simply the firsthand experience of the sacred. I mean, it's not weird and it's not woo-woo, and it's not far out. We've all had big or little mystical experiences all our life, like the ones we were just talking about.
John,
Yeah.
some other people need to mute their microphones.
You need to mute, everybody mute your mic because something is still coming through.
We have somebody rustling papers right now. You may think that we don't.
They're
do
on
that,
the
but we actually
phone.
do.
They're on the
What
phone.
happens when they're on the phone? How do they mute on the phone?
Well, there's a good question.
Mr. Coleman,
You mute
Okay.
on the phone by putting *6 in.
Ah,
All right, there we go. Thank you.
good. We have
I'll mute myself.
Okay. So as I was saying, we've all had big and little mystical experiences. And I've had wonderful workshops where I just get people like we began to do here to talk about them. And everybody's had them. I mean, they're much more prevalent and remarkable and life-changing than we give them credit for. So and they're so ordinary, like standing in silent awe, gazing up at giant, massive redwood trees, or meeting your newborn infant for the first time and going, oh my God. I mean, your thought stops and your breath catches and you are stunned. Or falling in love for the first time and seeing your beloved just shining like an angel, or feeling the palpable holiness of a sacred place, or simply being present at the passing of a loved one and feeling the consciousness, the energy in the room literally change in that moment. In these moments of mystical consciousness, the mind stops its chatter, perception heightens, and we just subtly experience the sacred consciousness that pervades everything in creation. Mystical experience is just that. It's the breakthrough of divine consciousness into personal awareness, and it reveals the absolute sacredness of life. That's the summary. It's the breakthrough of divine consciousness literally as a firsthand experience, and in that moment, you profoundly understand the sacredness of all life. So now the next concept is mystical consciousness, which arises from the same thought-free sacred awareness, only now we learn to do it intentionally, kind of like we do with the Buddhist singing bowl. You stop thinking heightened awareness and pay attention, and it begins to unfold. I have numerous exercises like this in the book, but in its fullness, mystical consciousness unveils and reveals to us an exquisitely beautiful, infinitely precious, luminous, and timeless world, literally creation, all over again. Everything in this consciousness is perceived as sacred, including us. And for the beloved has become everything, and everything is sacred, and everything around us is one. All your experience that you were talking about are openings to this one great, wondrous, mystical experience. So what happens then in this mystical state of consciousness? I mean, how are we changed? Because it is a profoundly transformative experience. Now, here's a poem from a woman named Sophia de Mello Briner, and I think she just describes this transformation in a beautiful way. She says, I'm listening, yet I can't tell if I hear silence or God. I'm listening, but I can't tell if I hear the plane of emptiness echoing or a keen consciousness that at the bounds of the universe deciphers and watches me. I only know that I walk like someone beheld beloved and known. And because of this, I put into my every movement solemnity and risk. This is the experience, the firsthand experience of mystical reality that transforms how you are in the world, literally. Not just, it's not an imaginary thing. It's not an act. It is, you are a different person in this state. Now, Rumi, this wonderful Persian poet, Sufi mystic poet, describes another piece of this experience and how we go back and forth all the time between these two states of consciousness. So he says, the breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are moving back and forth across the doorsill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. So he's really talking about how these two states of consciousness, which reflect the two sides of the brain, the two cerebral hemispheres, one side lost in thought, and the other side awakens to the pristine sacredness of the earth. I mean, can you imagine how differently you would be in the world if you were living from the consciousness of the right hemisphere? And so this now leads naturally to mystical activism, the topic of the book, because now we awaken a relationship with the divine as creation itself. I mean, do you want to know God firsthand? Experience creation in mystical consciousness. I was sitting yesterday in the yard, and it was a sunny, beautiful day, and I was going over some stuff, and I got so distracted by the colors of the plants that are coming out now. I mean, I was not only transfixed, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. And that's the thing that grabs you by this work from this world. This experience, this deep connection with creation as a conscious living experience of your own being is profoundly motivating. Sensing the beloved as nature itself, we just respond with immense gratitude, amazement, wonder, awe, and love. And we begin then to heal our relationship with the sacred. So we begin to invite her guidance, and we fight to defend her, and we look after her in whatever the ways we would a child. I mean, to me, it feels like you're driving down the road and in a busy area, and you see a toddler, 2-year-old, wandering across the street. What do? You don't keep on driving by and saying, well, I wonder what's going to happen here. You jump out of the car, you stop the traffic, you do whatever you have to do to save this child. Same thing with creation, okay? In that moment, we suddenly understand how sacred and precious all life is on earth, and we can't not respond. This is the power of that mystical connection to being. And I just briefly want to say something about the neurospirituality of this mystical consciousness. This consciousness dwells in the right cerebral hemisphere. I talk a lot about it in my book. It's always there, as Matt was talking about. So we are all mystics, but we don't pay attention to this experience because we're always thinking. Thinking blocks the mystical experience completely. You get so distracted you don't even see it or feel it. Shifting from left brain thinking to right brain consciousness, we awaken this mystical awareness, which in turn literally changes the way we see the world, changes the way we solve problems, do our work, and changes the way we receive guidance from the other world, from the other land of spirits and beings that are looking after us all the time. So what is our work here? What really is our work here? Christopher Fry, in a poem called A Sleep of Prisoners, which is actually quite perfect for this time in history, even though he wrote it in 1951. So it's like, the guy must have been really prescient. But he puts it this way. He says, the human heart can go the lengths of God. Dark and cold we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries breaks cracks, begins to move. The thunder is the thunder of the flows, the thaw, the flood, the upstart spring. And he says, thank God our time is now when wrong comes up to face us everywhere, never to leave us till we take the longest stride of soul we ever took. Affairs are soul size now. The enterprise is exploration into God. Where are you making for, he says, it takes so many thousand years to wake, but will you wake, for heaven's sake? So will we wake up in time before this thing becomes irreversible? And waking up then is our work now. But I want to get more specific then, because I know this can still sound kind of airy-fairy and too far out. So I want to get specific. How does this actually relate to climate change in a practical way? Well, the first answer is this: we have removed ourselves from creation. We didn't get kicked out, like it says in the Old Testament. We left of our own accord. Our waking hours literally are now spent in artificially insulated environments all the time, separated from the natural world, like cars and houses and offices and stores and jobs. And it's even worse. Our consciousness is now totally consumed by TV, cell phones, headphones, video games, internet, news feeds, social media, endless conversations, and of course our own chattering, unruly minds. So we live almost entirely in our thoughts, beliefs, opinions, and identities. And as a result, we don't see creation anymore. We don't see the sacred world anymore. Yeah, we can go by and we see trees and cars and things and animals and plants, but we say a redwood tree, a car, big house, dog. And once we name something, we think that's good enough. And then we don't experience it. We return back into the left hemisphere and spin our wheels in that labyrinth. That's why it's a crisis. Creation has been suffering all around us for years, and we haven't noticed. We've been too busy. And then sadly, failing to see the sacred nature of reality, we go on, almost automatically, thoughtlessly desecrating creation, exploiting an endless supply of raw materials, a cash cow for new consumer products, a garbage dump for toxic waste and discarded packaging. Because we are just lost in thought, we desperately need to come home to the firsthand experience of the sacred as creation itself. So how does mystical activism help us actually work on the climate crisis? There are 6 ways I just want to touch on. The first is that mystical activism awakens the perception of a sacred reality, which itself is profoundly motivating. I mean, you take care of what you love. You take care of what you love and what you hold sacred. Once in this consciousness, you cannot turn your back on creation any more than you can ignore that child running across the street. Second, it fills us with the energies of the divine self. We too are divine. I mean, I wrote about that a lot in my last book, The Divine Human, and we are fueled with the power of love and our own sacred being. When you bring mystical consciousness down into the being of your being, you discover you're not who you thought you were. You are this other being filled with love and grace and spontaneity and generosity, someone else almost entirely. It's such a beautiful discovery. And third, mystical activism also provides revolutionary new tools for solving real problems in mystical consciousness. And I don't have time to explain this at length, it's in the book, but it turns out that problems are never what you think they are, because we actually live in 2 worlds. As Rumi was saying, we have what is, and we have what we think it is. And that's what creates duality. And because we spend all our time thinking about stuff, we end up having debates and politics and belief systems and so forth. I think we continue to miss what creation is telling us firsthand right now. So number 4, mystical activism also, in one wonderful way I discovered, rekindles our relationship with soul, because the soul is actually another consciousness living in the right hemisphere, waiting for us to pay attention to it And we often refer to it as a still small voice. It's only still and small because we're not paying any attention. The left brain is running the show with the ego. But when we stop thinking and begin to have a relationship with this other self in the right hemisphere, it has so much it wants to tell you. It's really your higher self guiding you in lots of amazing ways. And fifth, mystical activism and spending our time in the right hemisphere opens a channel to the other world, to get help from deceased loved ones, ancestors, angels, spirit guides, divine, everywhere. Consciousness is actually boundless. I mean, there are no boundaries in consciousness except the ones that we make artificially, with the left brain saying that my consciousness is different than yours, and so on, and everybody has a different way of looking at it. But once you stop thinking and move into this space, there are no boundaries. And it shows you how powerful we are, because we are in the consciousness at that moment of the entire cosmos. And we have a power to affect that consciousness and be affected by it. And finally, mystical activism allows us to communicate directly with creation herself, to sit in the garden or walk through the woods and say, what do you need from me? And then sit quietly for 15 or 20 minutes and you begin to have a dialogue that tells you things that you never got from books, right where you are, right in your own world. What would you see if you could see with new eyes, with the awakened perception of mystical consciousness? David White, a wonderful poet from the Pacific Northwest, describes the transformation of consciousness he experienced one Easter morning in Wales. He recalls, sunrise through the misted orchard, morning sun turns silver on the pointed twigs. I have woken from the sleep of ages, and I am not sure if I am really seeing or dreaming or simply astonished, walking toward sunrise, to have stumbled into the garden where the stone was rolled from the tomb of longing. In mystical consciousness, we literally awaken in a sacred place and fulfill this longing for the divine world that we've had since we gave it up as a child. We all lived there at 3 and 4, and then somewhere's when we got the self-idea and the self-concept, you know, and began to think that we were a commodity that we had to keep improving, we lost it. And then we kept improving the false self all the way along here. And in aging and in this time in our life, we can come home to a consciousness that's free of that kind of clutter. So let me just wrap things up then. What we're facing in the climate crisis is huge. It's going to require thousands of changes and a radical transformation of consciousness to survive. Personal goals and checklists, you know, like less straws and less red meat and, you know, less driving and all these things are useful, and they're good and they're valuable. And they can motivate you in the short run, but in the years, the months and years and perhaps decades of this transition, which may never go all the way back, and in the face of terrible losses and suffering and despair, we need something much more powerful to sustain us. And that something is the experience of the sacredness of life. Not as a metaphor, not as a cliche, not as a symbol, not as a happy sentiment, you know, in a Hallmark card, but as reality itself that includes us. We protect what we experience as sacred. So sacred consciousness also heals and looks after us in ways that we take for granted, but are so important. You know, nature makes us mystics, and the mystics always go back to nature for healing. This is what Wendell Berry describes. He says, when despair for the world grows in me, and I wake up in the night at the least sound at what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief, I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. He's talking about this natural, they used to call it nature mysticism, this natural mystic experience that happens when we're out in the wilderness, and it finally, maybe it takes us 2 or 3 days before we really give up this civilization mind of ours for a while, and we are healed in its deep and conscious presence. Laura Weldon, who's a new friend of mine, she's a poet from Ohio. Actually, she's the 2019 Poet Laureate of the state, I believe. But she says something very beautiful. She says, I think this would fit all of us, what's incomplete in me seeks refuge in blackberry bramble and beech trees, where creatures live without dogma and water moves in patterns more ancient than philosophy. And she says, I stand still, child, eavesdropping on her elders. I don't speak the language, but my body translates as best it can, wakening the skin and gut, summoning the long kinship we share with everything. The long kinship we share with everything. She's talking about finding our true, the self, the true self expands now to include everything, including nature, including each other. And then we care for each other in a way that transcends identities and distinctions and belief systems. I mean, we were just talking about that, remembering the grace in nature when being in the wilderness, affected everything about you, your state of mind, your happiness, your very being. This is the awareness that we are having, or beginning to have more and more now as we return to nature. So in wrapping up, we live in mystical consciousness as we practice. It's really a spiritual practice, really, because you don't do it once and for all and then it's done, but you keep coming back to it, and I could talk about the practice more. But in mystical consciousness, we live more and more in the divine flow of here and now, not as me as a separate person having my goals and agenda, but me lived by the divine, lived by the flowing consciousness that is reality. And we experience the sacred world in everything we do, whether it's raising our kids or loving our family and friends or performing our work or just being kind and considerate or taking care of the climate or pursuing, climate activism, or just the simplest things like eating, drinking, and making love. They're all sacred in awakened consciousness because consciousness itself is sacred, and everything it touches when we are conscious to it is transfigured and transformed. So this way, sacred consciousness, when we live in this space, reverberates through the whole fabric of human activity and existence, touching everyone, everything, everywhere, and tipping the balance from this fear-generated thinking to this inclusive, love, non-judgmental presence to each other. So I want to just close with a couple quotes from Thomas Berry. He is so profound. He's this visionary thinker on ecological spirituality. He says, perhaps a new revelatory experience is taking place, an experience wherein human consciousness awakens to the grandeur and sacred quality of the earth process. Humanity has seldom participated in such a vision since shamanic times, but in such a renewal lies our hope for the future, for ourselves, and for the entire planet on which we live. And he has something also to say about the recovery of the sense of the sacred. He says, we will recover our sense of wonder and our sense of the sacred only if we appreciate the universe beyond ourselves as a revelatory experience of that numinous presence whence all things come into being. He's talking about God firsthand as nature itself. Indeed, the universe, he says, is the primary sacred reality. We become sacred by our participation in this more sublime dimension of the world. Really, what Barry's saying is not only prophetic, elegant, and sublime, it's also a beautiful description of mystical activism.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So inspiring. I want to just leave a little bit of silence here. We'll kind of let all that reverberate inside of us. Very strong. We have, yeah, well, let's start with some, if you have any questions. I think you might have questions or responses that you'd like to share with John after hearing what he had to say. And I'm going to have to ask Penny, somebody who can see the whole screen needs to call on the person. If you raise your hand and want to talk, I can only see 9. So would anyone like to give a response to John? Remember to unmute yourself. Okay, Patty, I can see you, Patty.
Okay, I just want to say thank you. I think it's really important to have these get-togethers where it is the choir getting preached to, but yay, we need to hear it over and over again. We need to revel in the good news that's going on amidst all the horrible news. And I just want to thank you because you said a lot of things that I almost cried. So thank you very much.
Patty, you remind me of something I was thinking as I was listening to John, that at times like this, we find out that we're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that just doesn't mean that we have friends. That means there's actually, I think of it as a grid around the world of people who are responding to this, to the world and through the mysticism. And that this creates I believe it can create a web of influence that could make a difference. So meeting like this and making our connections like this together are very important. And perhaps whenever any of us approach our own mysticism, however we do that with our own practices, we could think of each other while we're doing that so that we can remember that we are a web, not just a one. Does anybody have another response for John?
Cynthia's hand is up.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say this is my first time meeting in this group. I don't know how many times you've done this before, but I've just recently found it. Probably as a result of universal guidance that I've noticed that my own work in the environmental teaching of children, in the arts, and in approaching environment through gardening has been in a world that's totally filled with women and gay men. And I don't have any problem with women, and I don't have any problem with gay men, but I'm so happy to see so many male faces in this group and realize that there are men in the world who are concerned with the same issues that that I've been working so hard on. So thank you for having this group, and I hope to be here in future gatherings.
I hope so. We meet the first Thursday of every month at exactly this time. And our notices go out through the Creation Spirituality Community's newsletter mailing list. So if you want to keep up, we'll try to put your name on, or
I think that's how I found out about it. I just recently got on the mailing list.
That's it then.
Yeah.
Dawn.
Yeah.
Dawn.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it me? Okay. One of the things I think, I'm a psychologist who worked with people who struggle with themselves and put themselves into hell. And that having this movement into the sacred space also teaches self-love, so that you actually stop hating yourself inside in the hidden place, and you really discover that you're part of the goodness. And that's such a valuable change, because it enables us then to love everybody. And I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I long ago felt that and the research demonstrated it, that therapists are just not trained in spirituality. You know, they can, and when they then impose it, they either are imposing their own beliefs, or they send the client off to a clergy that may not really know how to listen to their struggle about belief or what they believe. And so I think that the art of bringing spirituality into psychotherapy is so important, and it really in some ways just begins with being silent. And it almost begins with being still and silent and not talking and letting people just be present. And as their breathing slows and thoughts slow, they come into another self, the one you're talking about. And then they have a capacity, begin to learn a capacity to come from that self, not the one who's always performing and having to live up to expectations.
Agreed.
More thoughts? Crystal's.
Well, the first thing I want to ask is, where do I get your book?
Well, it's on Amazon now.
Oh, it is. Oh, great.
All those sites, yep.
Okay. Then I wanted to, at the risk of making myself a persona non grata, I want to ask Penny, you know, the first article that you read right at the beginning, who was it that wrote that, Penny?
Penny, you're on mute.
Okay, it's from the Vice President of RARE and the Center for Behavior and the Environment.
Okay, I wanted to make an observation or a response to that article and then connect it to what John was saying. As he started off, or you started off, the part that you were reading, Penny, at the beginning, was him claiming that that humans are the only ones who can come up with a problem for the climate crisis we are in. And I want to suggest that that is a speciesist point of view, because there are many animals and plants who have a lot to teach us. They themselves have never polluted a river or never cut down a rainforest. So I want to just address the issue of speciesism, because that is a real problem in trying to come to a solution to the climate crisis. The belief that humans are the only ones who have the answers for that. And in fact, the dimension that John is talking about, the dimension of oneness, the dimension of the right side of the brain, that experience of consciousness is where animals and plants, the non-human beings, the four-legged, the feathered, the finned, the creepy crawlers, and the rooted ones, they live in that dimension all the time. That's their life. That's where they live. That is why when humans go into the forest, we feel spiritual. We have that mystical experience that John is talking about, because we are in the presence of those who are living in that energy all the time. And so rather than have this proud humanistic point of view that we're the ones that are going to solve the climate crisis, I suggest that we be a little humble and realize that the non-human nations are really our elders who have a lot to teach us. If we would, as John invited us to do, live in that other dimension more often, then we can hear their whispers, feel their nudges, hear their screams from a tree being cut down, 1,000 miles away. They are here to teach us. They are excited to teach us. They want to teach us, but we can't approach them with speciesism.
Crystal, thank you. Thank you. I totally agree with you. I think that, I sit with my dog sometimes, and I know my dog does not care what I'm thinking. There's no interest in anything I'm telling him, unless it has to do with a treat. But you can tell he's always interested in what's going on immediately around him, and is always interested in that. It's just such a sweetest thing. I think we need to listen. The Chronos, Western arrogance is what's killing the world. Yeah, Art, did you want to say something? Oh, okay.
Patty, did you want to say something again?
Yeah, I
You
want
with
to
the
say,
dog kissing your neck there.
no, okay, about speciesism and all of that. We're the species that has to change.
Yeah.
That's why we have to focus on what we have to do, because we can't make change. Trees change their nature. Only we can change our nature, and that's kind of what we need.
Hello, this is Melissa.
Yes.
Great. I want to sort of back up what Crystal was saying and then address something that John said. The reason to use inclusive language is because it reminds people that we share this planet with a lot of living creatures and other humans, most of which are not damaging the environment in ways that first world or Westerners are. So that's just that point. The second point, I really want to speak to the psychologists here, because I am a spiritual director and it is not psychology. And I have studied, I'm a graduate in 1992. I've studied 18 religions of the world, and I've been initiated into 7 different traditions of magic. What that means is I'm highly trained. I'm highly trained in spiritual practices, in ritual, and in the growth of the soul. That is my focus. And spiritual direction is different. We don't start with something's wrong. We say, God is good. This is God's work. And everything is absolutely fine, no matter what it is. And that's very different than psychology or psychiatry, which labels something as wrong. And I guess this is my moment of, I deeply appreciate your work, John, because it's, as a lifelong mystic who kind of couldn't help it, I get it. And it's not an easy life, especially when we burned our teachers. That was kind of dumb on the Westerners' part. But what I would say to all of us is to remember that when we partner, I prefer it when psychologists partner with me, because we have very different skill sets and we're doing different things. And I have only enough training to realize, am I possibly looking at a chemical imbalance? In which case, psychiatry makes a lot of sense. Or is this part of the soul? And that's all I want to say is please give me the same respect that you would like yourself. That if you don't have this training in deep spiritual practice, that you go get it, train with an elder, and learn, because I actually have a lot of clientele that is on the rebound from working with people who thought they knew things and didn't. But blessings. This is my first time on this call too, and as the witch that went to Jesuit seminary, it feels like I spend a lot of time reteaching my own community what we have to offer. But I feel like mystical arts are what the Inquisition took out of our culture. Everybody else kept them in. And so I invite you to go out and get some more tools. Anyway, that's it. End of sermon.
I think everybody should be in spiritual direction. I've been in spiritual direction like for 12 years now. Keep me on track, keeps me clear about what I'm doing. And I think everybody should be in psychotherapy for however much time, because you're right, they're 2 separate disciplines and they're each profound.
Absolutely.
Speaking of roles that we have, and I wanted to highlight this list John had made of the different ways that we can work as mystics for climate change. Sometimes we think the only way to work on activism is to be out in the streets, with a sign, shouting, and there are many ways to do it. And I think it's his list helps us brings to consciousness what we're already doing in a way that if we could name it, we could then, every time we do what we do, it has more power to it. It has more sense of clarity to it, and it becomes part of that web I was talking about. So I was just going to he has a whole explanation of each one, but I wanted to just list them and for you to think about it. I'm going to add one, and you may want to add some too that you are doing. But you might think about the ones, what it is that you're doing, that how do you take your mysticism and apply it in this first world civilization that we're trying to unlock and open. So here they are. A climate warrior. So Crystal would be a climate warrior. Okay. A citizen lobbyist. A gardener. An animal lover. A healer. An artist. A lover of creation, which is to walk out and to just be in nature and praise it. A skillful builder for sustainable new world. Those people who know how to do things and know how to change the way we do our plumbing and our electricity and drive our cars. Okay. A contemplative. A scientist. A spiritual leader, a social organizer, a conflict manager, a nature mystic, and a reducer of carbon footprint. And I'm going to add mine, which is I am a conversation warrior. And that doesn't mean to be really abrasive in conversations, but just to enter into the conversation whenever I can about the beauty and the sacredness of nature and how I'm responding to it, and my concerns, and asking people to express their concerns, which makes a connection. Does anybody else want to say either one that you heard that you want to tell us what you're doing, or one that you're doing that you didn't hear?
Thomas is up.
I just wanted to thank John for his talk and his book. And Michigan, where the chickadees are here, they speak to me often. And maybe I can listen more clearly now. Thank you, John.
Is Tom still reading?
I think he's finished.
He's done.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, anyone else? Don, please.
I actually didn't have something to say other than I'm sort of experiencing a stunned silence of just sitting in the presence of a lot of profound thinking and being, and it's hard to even think what to say because it's not a saying moment.
Let me say a couple things then, because I think that's kind of fun. I think first of all, this whole thing is like, it's like learning to swim. And if you read 20 books on learning how to swim, you can get all the mechanics down and the science and the physics. And none of that really helps, because then when you actually get in the water, you say, oh my God, that's what this is about. So it is, the left hemisphere is really great and useful in lots of areas, but it doesn't, you can only talk about mysticism for so long, and then you have to like go there. And so there's a practice I might just talk about briefly, because I think it's very simple and we can do it anytime, all day long, and begin to practice making this shift from the busy mind to the awakened mind. So there's like 5 steps in this. So the first step is in this practice is just stop thinking. Now everybody says that's way too hard. I could never stop thinking. I don't know how you do that. But the thing is really interesting is that when you thread a needle, when you paint, trim, when you stand on one foot with your arms out, there's a zillion ways that things that you do that you can't think. I mean, so when you shift into the sensory mode of existence, your thinking stops. So that's the key to the first step. You can begin to open this, like with the bell that the Buddhist singing bell. When you listen hard to that, you're not thinking about your 401k, you know, or what the schedule is tomorrow. You're just there. And so the second thing is as you shift over into that sensory awareness, is to heighten awareness. Become as awake and aware as you possibly can in a very, very sensory way. The mystics are always about sensory stuff. And in that sensory awareness, you begin to see how extraordinarily beautiful the world is. And then you begin to be enchanted, and you start getting taken in to the world that you live in. And then the third thing is just to experience it exactly the way it is, without time, without pressure, just to be present to it. So stop thinking, heighten awareness, experience the world exactly the way it is. And then the fourth one is come into the presence. Now, you've all had an experience of presence in one place or another, in the wilderness or in a church, or the alternative to that is simply to become conscious of consciousness itself. Because all consciousness is one, and all consciousness is divine consciousness. And so when you stop the thinking, you are literally in touch with the divine right there. So that intensifies your perception of the divine world all around you, because then you begin to realize it's all divine. So stop thinking, heighten awareness, experience the world the way it really is, come into the presence, and then feel the being of your own being. So what that really means is bring this heightened, awakened, intense consciousness into the ground of being, and discover that at the base of this is such joy and such aliveness and such, you know, energy that it makes you want to, well, I have trouble sometimes not dancing on tables. You know, I just want to get up and go hug people, but the coronavirus is slowing me down. But there's a sense of just coming alive that animates your climate activism. It's like that Howard Thurman quote, who says, you know, don't ask yourself what you should do in the world. Ask what makes you come alive, and do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Moving consciousness into the being of your being, you are then alive. And in the world that is now non-thinking but purely awakened consciousness, then you go out and you start, you know, taking care of animals and plants, and you start, and you know, the other thing that is clear to me is that I spent a lot of time working with Ira Progoff and the intensive journal workshop. And, you know, there's this wonderful journal processing where you really write kind of a script between yourself and somebody and the other, whatever that is, or whoever that is. What I realize is that the one writing is the left brain, who has all these questions and problems and beliefs and struggles with things. And so once it's kind of caught up in that thinking thing, you know, then you're having a dialogue with something other than that, and that's the other world, and that's whatever being you want from the other world, or it could be the animals. There are ways that you can have a dialogue with an animal or a life form or an insect or just about anything, and you say, hello, this is me, and I'm looking at you, and you are really interesting, and I can't wait to have, you know, more contact with you, and what are you thinking about, or what do you want to do? And then if you let something happen spontaneously in this dialogue, pretty soon it takes off by itself, and you're having a friendship with a living thing that's not you. Not your false self. It's you as your true self, but not you as your false self. So this then changes our mystical activism, because like, you know, like you were saying, people were saying that it's not just about fixing things, it's about waking up so that you're doing what the world needs you to do, not what you think you should do, and imposing your beliefs on the world. Does that make sense? Is that helpful at all? Good. You're all mystics. We're all mystics. You know, that's, and it's not that we want to get rid of the left brain because, planes, trains, automobiles, computers, things, that's, really pretty amazing. We couldn't have this conversation without our computers, but we live there 98% of the time. That's where we're in trouble because not only do we not look out the window very long, we don't go outside and sit there for hours at a time. Like Crystal did, and spend 2 years in the wilderness doing nothing but being present. Yes, Anita has a question.
I don't have a question. I actually kind of have a response, if you don't mind.
Here, go for it.
So, so I'm thinking about some of my own experience. When you were just talking about conversations with animals or plants, you were very active, John. And I'm thinking about animal communicators that I've heard lately, who said, no, it's silent, just being there. And my own experience would kind of agree with that. So I lived on about 25 acres in North Carolina for several years. And about 6 months into that, the trees started talking to me. I did not have to go out and talk to them. I was just, after 6 months, I was into a quiet enough place that I could begin to hear. And then when I came to this little town and bought this old house and on a half acre for, community garden purpose, but that's never really worked. What happened instead is I just ran out of money and I couldn't obey the mowing ordinance anymore. So I became very disobedient. And I was just so excited by what started happening when I stopped mowing. And so my main, when Gail was doing her list, I said, no, I'm an anti-gardener, because it's not about producing something, right? My main gardening activity has been pulling grass so that all the other plants can grow. And then it got to the point where I could actually eat wild forage for the entire summer.
Wow.
And didn't have to buy any greens at all because all the wild plants simply came in and medicine plants came in. Now, I am a little bit of a lightning rod for people who are upset by this, and are still under the thrall of the American fetish with lawns, which I consider deeply immoral. So, I consider myself a warrior, but it is the sit and observe and be with and hear kind of warrior. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Anita. I appreciate that. I totally hear you. Cynthia's got her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Anita, I'm in the same boat with you. I've actually even been cited for code compliance.
Right.
My beautiful garden. And I just want to suggest to you what you should do is get your yard officially designated backyard wildlife habitat, and then you'll get a sign that you can post, and that tells your neighbors that this is not an untended, horrible place. This is specifically meant for wildlife, wild plants, wild birds, wild life. So that's just a little suggestion. It seems to have worked for me, at least in the backyard.
Yeah, and I don't have a backyard. My lot goes from one street to another, so it's all on the street, and it's all open, and I don't have enough money to fence the whole thing in. So it's very visible.
So don't fence it, just post a sign saying, I'm doing this on purpose.
Right, and I'm not sure that that's allowed in the ordinances. At this point, it's not, and so that's what I'm slowly confronting people about. But thank you.
Civil disobedience is a space for that too.
So, Crystal, I think you might be the last one, I believe.
Okay.
Well, I think that what John is presenting is really what gives me hope for the future. And I'm just wondering how you, John, spread your perspective and your vision and what you are offering, or what little piece of the pie you're bringing into climate actions. Because I think that so much of climate action is still being directed by the left Western patriarchal speciesist mentality.
Yeah.
So how are you spreading this? How do we help spread your vision? You know, how do we do that? And how do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah, so I wrestled with sometime with like, what should I be doing? And then I realized that I'm doing what I should be doing because I'm doing what I'm made to do. I'm made to be a mystic, and my language is mystical, and I just love talking to people about this, anybody who's willing to listen. And that's why I wrote the book. So all I can say is, tell people to read the book and invite me to come and speak or something, because I think everyone knows how to do this. They just have forgotten. And the more we do it, the calmer we get, and the more peaceful we get, and the more loving we become.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Yes, and we put on, sent out a interview. There's an interview on YouTube of him, and I know he's having some speeches lately, which gives us hope. And I'm using this book at a retreat I'm leading, so use it. So thank you, John, so very much. Thank you. It's been powerful. Next month is a guest of John's, a friend of John, which is Lynn Ziegler, who is with did I get that right?
No, Lynn Iser,
sorry, of the Elder Action Network. And do you want to say anything about her, John?
No, I'll let you be surprised. She's very, very active. She's a real activist. She's been to Standing Rock. She takes bold stances. I think it'd be so fun to get someone who really, like Crystal, who stands in the fire, and sees what happens.
Okay, thank you. And then after that, we would like to have a panel of people who are telling us what it is like, the climate change experiences for them in their own regions. Some people are experiencing it a lot more than others. And would any of you be willing to speak and be on that panel? We'd like to hear what's happening in your part of the country. Send us a little chat. Penny Moulis is doing it, so that's wonderful. We appreciate that. And that's the kind of the DC region right there. Anybody?
No, it's Tidewater, Virginia, Southern Virginia.
Southern Virginia. Okay. I've got a crying grandbaby, so my daughter has been going crazy this whole time because she came in and somehow the baby is just having a trouble. So I'm going to turn myself onto mute again. The next thing is that we'd like to have an elder powwow. Wondered if you would all like to get together in Wisconsin to meet in the flesh and dance around the fire at night and getting in touch with nature. Is that something you would like to do?
Well, it sounds like great fun if someone were coming through the Southern Appalachians on the way and could pick me up.
Where will that be, Gail? You're muted.
Muted, Gail.
Jim Roberts still here on the line?
I think he's off.
Jim was on. Jim is what he shares this place with some others. Penny, do you want to tell us more about the place?
Yes, Manitoumi is a retreat natural area about, I would think, an hour from Madison, Wisconsin. Not a hard drive up from Chicago, doable, especially if carpooling were to happen. But it's been used for vision quests through UCS, and I did a mask making retreat with Kaleo up there. And otherwise, there's an active community that uses this beautiful, lush green area. And Jim, who is the sole remaining member who founded this retreat center, has been involved with creation spirituality for 30 years in his Lutheran church in Rockford, Illinois. So I can't stress enough how lush it is. There's room for 20 of us and then there's lots of camping room. So I highly recommend the beauty of the place.
And when is that going to be, Gail or Penny?
We're just in the discernment process of, is there energy for this? And we could, send out a survey or something like that to see what might work, see what works with Jim, and go from there. But there does seem to be a little interest, so maybe the survey is the next step. Yeah?
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. All
All right.
right. And anybody here who would like to do the climate, tell us about your region. Anybody here's let that settle in a little bit more?
Climate or climate related. For instance, Madison is facing the placement of F-35 fighter jets in our downtown area. It's known to be, horrifically noisy, disturbing to children and other living beings. And so, if you have an issue like that, that's not spot on, but one that is, bubbling in your community, I think how any of us do this is of benefit to all of us.
Thank you. That makes more sense. That's good.
Well, feel free to be in contact. You know how to, we have the Facebook page. We have the Facebook group, Creation in Crisis. I think we have a little area in Creation Spirituality Communities. So just be in touch if any of this comes to you at a later time that is like, oh yeah, I'd like to participate.
What all they can do is respond to their invitation that came today. Not today, but the first one they got, and that sends it back to me when they get the flyer from Creation Spirituality Communities newsletter mailing list. That one will come directly back to me. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you all for all your wonderful. Penny, you're going to close this out, or John, you're going to close us out, or?
Well, I had a poem to close it out with, if you don't mind. It's a kind of a call and response poem, but your response is only this. All your job is to say, after each phrase I say, your job is to say, may it continue. So here goes. Cacophony of small birds at dawn.
May it continue.
Sticky monkey flowers on bare hills.
May it continue.
Music on city streets in summer nights.
May it continue.
Kids laughing on roofs, on stoops, on the beach, in the snow.
May it continue.
Triumphal shout of the newborn.
May it continue.
Deep silence of great rainforests.
May it continue.
Fine austerity of jungle peoples.
May it continue.
Clumsy splash of pelican in smooth bays.
May it continue.
Clean snow on the mountain.
May it continue.
Fierce eyes clear of light of the aged.
May it continue.
Rite of birth and naming.
May it continue.
Love in the morning, love in the noon sun, love in the evening among crickets.
May it continue.
Long tales by fire, by window, in fog, in dusk, on the mesa.
May it continue.
Screeching of cats on backyard fences.
May it continue.
Without prisons.
May it continue.
Without empire.
May it continue.
In sisterhood.
May it continue.
In brotherhood.
May it continue.
Though the earth seem lost.
May it continue.
Through exile and silence.
May it continue.
As stars continue,
May they
May it continue.
we begin the work.
May
May
it
it
continue.
The great transmutation,
May it
May it
May it
continue.
continue.
a new heaven and a new earth.
May it
May it continue.
born.
Amen.
May it continue. That's called Life Chant by Diana DePrima.
Yeah.
Blessings. Thank you.
Thank you all. See you next
Thank
month. I
you.
hope.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yay, John.
Oh, the baby.
Yeah.
I love it. I
Oh,
love it.
she's had a hard time. She's about to walk and crawl, and she's so excited she can't bear it.
Oh, yeah. Get ready for your knees.
I know. I know.
Good luck tonight, John. I hope it goes very well.
Thank you. Yeah, this will be a totally different audience. We'll see.
All
All
right.
right. Till next time.
Till next
Okay.
time.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Oh, my baby. I love babies.
She's Lily is her name.
Lily.